and we welcome everyone to our first interim BNR Subcommittee, General Government, Finance, Personnel, and Public Retirement meeting. Before we get started, I would remind everyone to please put your cell phones on silent if you have them with you. Also, for those members or guests that may be participating remotely, that when we call roll, number one, you let us know where you're located at, you're participating remotely, and to make sure that you mute your sound, your audio on your system until it's time for you to speak or you wish to speak. That way we don't get feedback. So we welcome everyone. We're excited and look forward to our presenters this morning. And with that, I'm going to call this meeting to order and ask the Secretary to please call the roll.
Senator Mills.
I'm here remotely from home.
Thank you. Senator Southworth.
Here in the room.
Senator Thomas.
I'm here in Kentucky.
Senator West. Representative Bratcher.
Here in the room.
Representative Donahue.
Yes, ma'am, in my district.
Thank you. Representative Goforth.
Here in the room.
Representative Graham. Representative Hart.
Here in the room.
Representative Koenig.
Here in the room.
Representative Meredith.
Here in the room.
Representative Miles. Representative Pratt. Representative Raymond.
I'm here from home.
Thank you. Representative Tate.
Here in the room.
Representative Wheatley.
Here in the room.
Senator McDaniel. Representative Petrie. Representative Reed. Representative Gooch.
I'm here in my home district remotely.
Thank you. Representative Miller.
Here remotely.
Thank you. Co-Chair Nemus. I'm sorry.
Present in the room.
Co-Chair Dossett.
Present, remote from the 9th District.
Thank you. Chair Blanton.
Present in the room.
Mr. Chairman, make note that Representative Graham is here, please. Thank you.
Duly noted. Thank you. And I hope everyone enjoyed their holiday weekend, and we are ready to get back to work. And we're going to begin this morning hearing from the Kentucky Infrastructure Authority. And I will allow you all to begin. As each presenter, Mr. Secretary, you all present, please just announce your name and who that you are here presenting, so we will have that for the record. So I'll turn the floor over to you all. No, push your button.
Oh, there we go.
Very
All
good.
right, sir. You'd think after as many of these as I've been at, I would know how to control some of these technical issues, but I've got help today, thankfully. And Sandy Williams is not only controlling the slides, but also, as you all know from her role at Department of Local Government at KIA, she is a subject matter expert, and we rely on them extensively. All right, so let me also introduce, Mr. Chairman, before I get started, let me introduce the others who are going to be speaking today, and that includes, of course, the State Budget Director, John Hicks, who is responsible for the Broadband project as project manager. My role is a project management role for the water and wastewater project portion. Deputy Secretary for Public Protection Cabinet, Ray Perry, has been assigned as what we describe as the project director. Ray is both involved in the broadband and in the water and wastewater projects, actively involved. And of course, you're going to hear from Commissioner Keene. Also with us today is Executive Director Matt Stevens, Department for Local Government, and I've already mentioned Deputy Executive Director Sandy Williams from the Kentucky Infrastructure Authority. Okay, let me say right out of the gate that the governor appreciates the opportunity that we have to administer these funds. The work that was done through leadership and the administration to set this arrangement up and the opportunity that we have, therefore, to manage these funds on behalf of the legislature and on behalf of the administrations, on the behalf of the administration. I can also tell you that the governor is very actively involved in this project. In fact, I just got a text a few minutes ago from him asking about how things were going on the portal that was just announced yesterday. We, in a sense, the project is now open for applications. And it's good to be able to report that, having been in the project management business myself through construction for almost 50 years, that it's good to report that we are on schedule. The governor actually gave a date on about a month ago to be for the portal to be open and for applications to be then available on June the 1st. And it's good to know that we've met that deadline. Now, let me go into the what I sometimes say, and I know you all know this, the 5 W's and 1 H, the who, where, who, what, where, when, why, and how, and sometimes I add a how much. And we'll be talking about that. In fact, we may start with the how much right out of the gate. Just for context and as a reminder, we will be, we got the first slide up, Sandy. All right. The slide is up. The slide is showing here on our monitor. This is when we need music playing in the background, isn't it? There we go. What is it? It is, and especially, I guess the rationale we have for it now is that we've been out of practice for a little while in these presentations, in these meetings.
Maybe that right there. I just don't know.
I'll tell you what, why don't we go ahead with and then when they are able to catch up, we'll do that. Will that work, Mr. Chairman? All right. I think I forgot to say one thing when I started out, and that was, if I did, then y'all forgive me, but I try to always say thank you, each and every one of you, for your public service. Knowing what that's like a little bit myself from having sat in your chairs in local government, there's a lot of appreciation that's not offered routinely, so appreciate it. Okay, so with drinking water and wastewater, as you all may remember, $250 million was committed for drinking water and wastewater projects. Broadband deployment was together was $300 million, and that's what John Hicks is going to share with you. First, in the drinking water and wastewater grant program, what is the program? It involves the planning, design, and construction. Okay, it's coming up now. All right, there we go. So it involves the planning, design, and construction for water and sewer related projects that have a social, economic, or environmental impact. It's funded by the American Rescue Plan, the ARP Act of 2021, Coronavirus State Fiscal Recovery Fund. It was appropriated in the 2021 regular session by the legislature, Senate Bill 36, to the Kentucky Infrastructure Authority to administer the program. So, next slide is how much money do we have? Now, this is for wastewater for water and wastewater. Again, John's going to talk about broadband. So of the $250 million appropriated, $150 million is a pool allocated by county population. And those funds were announced yesterday. Those allocations were announced yesterday. A $50 million pool is allocated for unserved drinking water customers in rural areas and for federal consent decree projects. And those projects, those federal consent decree projects are in Lexington, Louisville, Northern Kentucky Sanitation District Number 1 and Winchester. The $49.9 million pool out of the $250 million is to supplement a project grant where the cost is greater than the county's application, or it is designated for cost escalations or changed conditions. So if you'll think about it this way, we know that some grants are going to be applied for and approved. Then when the design is completed, the engineering documents are completed, and bids are taken, those bids may have exceeded the original appropriation. So this is why we have identified what I would describe as a contingency account. Half of that 49.9, let's just say 50, because that last 100,000 is for administrative costs. But half of that 50 million is assigned as a contingency for change conditions that often occur in any construction project. My own experience tells me that from 8 to 10% of a project may increase depending on change conditions that were not anticipated when the engineering documents were prepared. And that's why that allocation. Okay, so let's go to the next slide, Sandy. What's the project scope? There is 120 in each county. There are 269 is the number of unserved drinking water projects identified, and 4 federal consent decree utilities. Number of utilities in the state, 367 public drinking water utilities and 346 public wastewater utilities. How will the utilities apply? Utilities will use the WRIS system, the Water Resource Information System that Sandy and her shop operate. They will use the project profile information as the application. They will coordinate with the Water Management Council at the area development districts. The water management coordinator at each ad district will be the point person. Water service coordinator will help utilities complete the project profile, and the coordinator will select 2021 DWW grant program as the funding source under the budget tab. Okay, that's the portal that was actuated yesterday. In a sense, the switch was turned on yesterday for the applications, right, Sandy?
Yes, sir.
Okay, good. All right, when can the utilities apply? Now, by submitting or updating the project profile. Now that was up until even yesterday. And then after the formal call for projects, which has occurred now. The note here is that utilities will have time to create a new project profile before final decisions or awards are made. So basically that's saying there's flexibility. Okay, how will the projects be selected? Out of the $150 million pool, they will be selected through coordination between the cities and the counties. And as the governor in the last 2 weeks in the meetings that he's been holding, the virtual meetings with the county judges and the mayors, has been emphasizing and encouraging the cooperation in the selection of these projects from the county judges and from the county officials, and working with the ad district. So as Sandy and her shop know, as Dennis knows, and KIA and DLG know, the good news is that we have a system in place. This represents a surge of projects for that system that's in place and some new federal requirements, but the system to manage the projects is in place. And that should be reassuring. At least it was for me when I was asked to participate in the project. And it should be reassuring to you all as well. The $50 million pool will be evaluated based on the number and type of projects that are that check the box, that basically are appropriate. Unserved drinking water customers in rural areas will be part of that $50 million pool. I mentioned that earlier. And the federal consent decree projects. Those are the Lexington, Louisville, Northern Kentucky, Winchester. Of the $49.9 million pool, and I already referred to this, $25 million is designated for cost escalations and change conditions from the original designs or engineering work. And then $24.9 million, or roughly, obviously $25 million, is to supplement a project grant under conditions where change orders may have been appropriate. All right, we must be able to obligate all funds by December 31st, 2024, another condition. And that really, I mean, when I look at it from a program development perspective, having been in these projects pretty much all my life, in projects like this, that really gives sufficient time for the conceptual development of a project, for the scope development of the project, for the engineers to be brought on board and to design the projects, and then to bid the projects and to execute or implement the projects in construction. That gives adequate time. We will be using the Water Resource Information System, WRIS, to evaluate the social, economic, and environmental criteria. Now, this next slide is, y'all have to forgive me, because in project management, we often look at flow diagrams, and they can look. There's Senator McDaniel over there. He's smiling because he knows from being in the construction business exactly what I'm about to go into. I will not go into each one of these blocks. I promise you all, I won't burden you with that. But I am using this to illustrate the next two slides, actually, to illustrate that we are familiar with the process and we will be following this process, which takes us from the initial application, the call for projects, the initial selection of the grant for funding, conditional commitment given, the engineering and the design, that is the plans, development of the plans and specifications. We've got to conduct environmental reviews and get an approval. And then we release the project for bids and receive bids. The next slide shows a continuation, which essentially basically says, let's get the job done now. We can build the project and get paid for the project. Okay, let's go to the next slide. When will the grant funding be available? After additional federal program guidance is received, after the federal funding is received, after the administrative regulations are executed, which we can check that box. That occurred, the filing of those administrative regs occurred yesterday. So I said earlier that we're on schedule. That was scheduled to occur on June the 1st, and it did occur. And after the county allocation amounts are released, and that also occurred yesterday. So we're on track. What is left to do? Coordinate with area development districts. Those are the water resource coordinators in the area development districts. They are the point people for this coordination. Again, this is a process that's not unfamiliar to KIA, familiar with this process. What is left to do? Coordinate with the elected officials. Review the federal guidance, be consistent with the federal guidance, and finalize grant commitment letter and grant assistance agreements. And then we added that final bullet point to get the projects underway and completed. So that represents the scope of the project that we're following today. And we can go on, Mr. Chairman, into State Budget Director Hicks' presentation on broadband, or we can take some questions or comments that you'd like to introduce now for us.
Yes, sir, Mr. Secretary, and I think to keep these two issues separated, that at best we take the questions now for you all on the water, and then when Director Hicks comes, we'll be dealing specifically with broadband. And so let me begin. I do have one question here before I get to the other members. How do localities apply for the federal funding, and then who determines the distribution? That was a question that's been sent to me from another representative.
Okay. I'll take a stab at it, and then Sandy can correct me.
Okay.
All right. The application process is through the portal the switch has just been turned on. The water resource coordinators in each ad district will be the point persons for the applications, and they know that process. And of course, they're familiar with if you will, pulling together the information and getting consensus on the projects. Some of these projects are actually, as Sandy can confirm, there are a couple of handfuls of projects that are shovel ready. So they are already in the Water Resource Information System process. They've already passed that process, so they're shovel ready, and we can move on them. The allocations are according to the numbers that were released yesterday per county. And those allocations are based on population. Okay. Sandy, you want a footnote? What did I miss? You didn't miss that. You can't correct me? All right, okay.
Mr. Secretary, one other thing. Could you share with us the website where the portal is located, how that, if we've got any local governments that may be tuning in today,
Yes, sir.
they'll have nowhere to go
Sandy do
to?
that.
Yes, that's under
is it on?
Kentucky Infrastructure Authority website.
Turn your mic on, please.
Thank you. The Kentucky Infrastructure Authority website, and I will get, I believe it's kia.ky.gov.
Okay. Very good. Thank you. Now we have some members that have some questions. First up, Representative Goforth.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a couple questions, if that's all right, Mr. Chairman. First of all, Secretary Gray, thank you for being here, but you said 120 potential projects, at least one per county, so every county is going to be assured a project? Is that what you're saying?
Is that the way it's... That is the intent of the legislation, so we're working toward that. Representative Goforth.
Okay. Well, the intent, but
Yeah.
are all of my counties going to get a project if they apply for a project?
Well, what's that? They've all received allocations. I'm also thinking that some of this will be a function of the ad districts working together with the counties, but the intention is for every county. It has an allocation, but what I'm saying is that the allocation for one county may not be sufficient for a project that might link into another,
Sure.
influenced by another county. But that is fully the expectation and what is being worked toward.
Okay.
Yes.
I've just heard back from 2 counties while we're sitting here, and they said they haven't heard anything yet, and that was my concern.
Well, they got that. Those numbers were released yesterday, so
Okay.
they will have that now.
Okay.
And if there's a issue about it, I know you've got my cell phone, and
Yes,
I'll
sir.
call whoever you want me to call
Thank
to
you.
confirm what those numbers are.
Thank you very much.
Yes, sir.
Just one last thing. There's a window. Is there a window for that application process? And then so if there's a window, how are you picking those projects before that window closes?
Yeah, I'm gonna let Sandy work on that one.
Thank you. That's a very good question. The intent is to be inclusive and not close the application window. So if you consider projects in various stages of life, some, as Secretary Gray mentioned, were shovel-ready today, and some haven't been thought of yet. So our hope is to leave the application window open, so those projects that need more time will be allowed that time.
That was just my real concern, that those folks don't get left behind if they're not shovel-ready, where you have projects that are already shovel-ready.
Yeah.
Okay, all right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
The full intention is for these to be newly conceived projects that are needed by the counties.
Thank you
All
very
right,
much.
next up, Representative Bratcher.
The federal consent decree in Louisville is a sewer MSD issue. I don't know if you know that. Is that what is that the same when you referred to the federal consent decree for Louisville? Do you know if that's what you were?
Right, yeah, I'm familiar with that. We've got one in Lexington too.
Yeah.
And that is, yes, sir,
Yeah.
the federal consent decree.
So the way that this would funnel through, say, Jefferson County would be KIPTA, the ADD in Louisville's KIPTA, right? So that would be where to touch base on how this is going to funnel through, say, Jefferson County.
Yes, sir. I believe that KIPTA has already met with all of their utilities
Great.
to at least get in front of the process, which opened yesterday.
Okay, next we have Representative Meredith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I got a couple or three questions, if I might, and I'll try to be brief on all of them. I will. In the presentation, it mentioned the funds must be, and I'm using a different word because I didn't write it down at the time of the slide, but funds must be kind of encumbered by 2024. That doesn't mean they have to be fully expended. They just have to be contracts executed, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Second thing, obviously you've got the different pots and pools of money that you're talking about there. A project or something going on with a system like the Martin County system that we've all heard about over and over again, does it fall in the individual county allocation pool, or would it fall in the unserved pool, since they are somewhat served but not served in a way that's usable water, frankly?
Good question, and I'm gonna I don't think we've covered that one yet in our thinking, but I bet Sandy has.
The definition that we're using for unserved is that the customer has potable water. If the customer in Martin County does not, it would fall under that definition.
Okay.
So that means, I've got a question. So, well, just quickly, does that mean, Sandy, that Martin County will have its allocation? Does that mean then translate into that it may have a opportunity for an additional allocation for unserved? Okay.
And that's kind of what I figured, but I wasn't sure. And then the final one, and it's kind of a two-part question. So you talked about the city and the county corresponding and cooperating on projects. So what happens on that allocation if the city and the county can't agree, number one? And the second phase of that question is, what do we do with these individual county allocations and things if we get towards the end of that period that we're running into in 2024 and money has not been used at that point? Will we then try to create a last-minute pool to try to get projects funded that may have been in the pipeline but didn't, to use up some of those allocated resources if they're not used prior?
Good question.
To address the last question first, because that's the one that's fresh in my mind. It's my understanding that no county allocation can be given to another county without the approval of the General Assembly. And could you
First part of that question was just what happens if a city and you said the city and the county were to cooperate and try to agree on a project or set of projects. What if a city and a county can't agree within that? Is it a divide and conquer at that point, or how do we handle that?
We do hope that there can be cooperation at the local level. We believe that the local utilities know much better than us here in Frankfort what they need. If they cannot decide, the projects will be selected by the KIA chair.
Thank you very much.
That is a rare
Representative Wheatley.
situation.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And here's a couple brief questions, hope to be quick. So just to be sure, thank you all. And again, Secretary Gray a couple times in a couple days, but always a pleasure. A municipality that has nothing in the works yet, just to be clear, they can start a process today and become part of this with a water project. Is that the way that works? Okay, that's great. All right, a little more complicated up in northern Kentucky. You know, we have a consent decree. Mm-hmm. So there's $50 million allocated for the underserved or unserved and consent decree areas, and then the $150 million for the counties. And then we're talking about multiple counties in SD1 in northern Kentucky. So just looking at pools of money and as Representative just asked about, will there be ways to combine certain projects that might fall under both categories and get bigger projects done, especially related to our consent decree, which is very expensive from what I understand?
Yeah, I think, tell me if I'm wrong here, Ray or Sandy, but I think this is where the ad district comes into play and the and the coordinator comes into play. This is that's the purpose of bringing consensus to some of these issues where there may be, different points of view, of course, but there is precedent for that, for working through those kinds of project issues.
Representative Graham.
It's really a follow-up to all the questions. Thank you, Mr. Secretary, by the way, and thank you for your service. But in your presentation, you made the statement, we are familiar with the process and we will follow the process. And based on my colleagues asking all these questions, can you briefly go through what those processes are? Are they based upon federal guidelines? Are they based upon state guidelines? Are they based upon both guidelines? How is that, if you can, just explain it a little bit so that we can understand what that process will be?
Okay.
Well, is that too much asking at this particular time? But to kind of give us a familiarity with
Of course, it's not asking too much. How can I say it? No, you know better. Good. So what I'm saying is that this represents a surge for KIA in terms of project value, the number of projects, and the appropriation, the $250 million in projects. That represents a surge of volume of projects. The federal guidelines are generally consistent with what has been employed before. So we do have new funding, of course, that is allocated on the basis of counties. So the counties will be receiving these funds specifically, and then will be making choices and decisions based on that funding. Then we will execute the projects in the similar fashion as is already being done through KIA.
Once the counties have made their decisions, they will have to follow those which they submitted and recommended. They cannot change in terms of moving money to other projects. It has to be on those things that they petitioned for or requested from the very beginning. There's no changing.
That is a constraint.
Okay.
Yeah. Now, when you ask that question, Representative Graham, I'm sure with 120 counties and multiples of projects, there will be conditions or situations where there may need to be some flexibility for whatever reason, and then that would go to the KIA board. Is that right?
All right. We've got several more people asking, so I ask that we try to move through these as quickly as possible because we do have Director Hicks and Commissioner Keene still to speak today. So next is Representative Miles.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll go down my list really quick, and hopefully you can answer them really quick. My first item is on the debt service of you. We've got cities and counties that have tremendous amount of debt service on projects they've already done, and I know that that is not part of the rules of the federal money, that cannot be used for debt service. So in the event that we can advocate for that option, I would hope that the state of Kentucky would do that, because we do have some that it would be more helpful if they could get out of debt compared to starting new projects and going further in the debt. Along those lines, the matching funds, can you briefly kind of give an idea what they can use on matching funds? This is a substantial amount of money, but these type of projects are going to be well beyond the amount of money that will be coming into that county to complete that project. So how can we use the matching money from the different pots? And most of them are federal for these type of projects. So what kind of matching money can we use along those lines? And the last and final issue that I think we're going to have, not only in this, but also in broadband, it's kind of like we've given money to all the kids for snow cones. They're all in line at the same time. Is that price of that snow cone going to go up substantially for the amount of projects that, we're even hearing it already for being able to get access to pipes, getting access to fiber, getting access to everything. So do you all have any advice for that, or is that something that you're trying to encourage or discourage counties from waiting or moving forward quicker, or, how do they best serve themselves? So
I'm going to ask Sandy, why don't you take the first two? I'm going to try to pipe in on the last one. Speaking of pipes, so.
It's my understanding that the funding to address the payment of debt service, it's my understanding that that is a restriction at the federal level.
Secretary,
correct.
Is your mic on?
Yes.
Okay, pull it closer to you there. Some of them can't hardly hear you.
Sorry. So the restriction for the repayment of debt service is a federal restriction.
Correct.
That we don't have a say in. The use of matching funds, there is no match requirement for these drinking water and wastewater grants, and the funding may be combined with other federal dollars, as long as those federal dollars do not have a restriction placed on them.
Okay.
Now, on the question of price escalations and what this represents in terms of new projects, and of course these new projects are all across the country, not just Kentucky. If I had a crystal ball, that could answer that question, Representative Miles, I probably wouldn't be here. I'd probably be doing something else and maybe being an economist. But there's no question that price escalations, are occurring across the board in the Senator McDaniel, you may want to speak to this. We're all seeing that. I think the best thing can do is take it one day at a time. We just do the best we can with the projects that we have. We do the best we can to administer them efficiently. Get the applications in and move them through as efficiently as we can, and then let the process play out. That would be the best thing.
Thank you.
Representative Pratt.
Real fast one. In Scott County, we both have Kentucky American and Georgetown. Are these funds going to be available for public and private companies?
The Kentucky Infrastructure Authority is limited by statute to provide project financing to governmental agencies. If the county wishes to apply on behalf of a private utility, so most water associations are private utilities, as well as Kentucky American, then the county may apply on behalf of that private utility.
Thank you.
Senator McDaniel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, you nearly read my mind. with my comment, and Representative Miles somewhat stole the thunder there, and this is just going to be a comment, but you know, having been around governmental budgeting in some capacity from small unit leader in the Army back in the late 90s through where I sit now, I see that we hit monetary deadlines, and a lot of times our desire is to make sure the money gets spent, not make sure the money gets spent most efficiently and effectively. And as a lot of us are beginning to see now on the private side, a lot of this construction capital is beginning to park on the sidelines waiting for some de-escalation in pricing. And so I don't know the exact answer to this, but it would seem to me that the wisdom may very well be in these projects that get encumbered further out in 23 and 24 being the best spent money. Because this, 9 months ago, nobody had a clue this money was even going to be coming necessarily. But now there's a lot of excitement, and a lot of us get a lot of pressure from home to see the money spent immediately. But I can tell you, and Mr. Secretary, you can, and lots of you on this committee can, the personnel that we have to execute these tasks are fully encumbered and then some. And we're hoping and praying for some kind of jobs relief, either through immigration stuff or through state level things or whatever the case is, to help fill the capacity that we have right now. And so I don't want to belabor the point terribly, merely make the statement, Mr. Secretary, and as Representative Miles so astutely noted as well, the best spent money might be the money that's delayed in being spent right now to try to get these project costs down. Thank you.
I'll just say, as a footnote, I think that's a really useful insight, Senator. And as we go through these applications, and as we see what's occurring in the especially in the engineering and construction sectors, we need to be mindful of any flexibility that might give us the most effective use of the funds. That's really good insight. Thank you.
Representative Koenig.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, I have a question for Chairman Petrie, who was here and departed. When do we expect the final federal guidance to be issued?
When is that? I don't know that. We don't. John? Yeah.
Yeah, Representative Koenig, John Hicks. The initial guidance was issued May 10, and there's a 60-day comment period from which then the federal government will complete their final rule. Right now they're calling it the interim final rule. And so within some time period after the 60-day comment, we're going to get the final rule.
So we'll get it when we get it.
Yeah, so, you know, late July at the earliest for
Okay.
the final rule.
All right. And thank you. And a question for myself. Can a county coordinate and spread their allocation out among multiple projects? And if so, do they have to put that in the project profile?
That's a good question.
Yes and yes.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right, I think that wraps up the questions. I do have one comment along the lines of the increase in materials right now. We're seeing it. If you're building a home right now, bless your heart, because it's a bad time to be doing it. But ultimately, I think we all agree that our ultimate goal is to serve as many of our constituents across the state to get them clean drinking water and access to it. And so sometimes the delay might be better than actually going ahead if we can get it to more people. So just something to think about. But thank you all. And so next up, the topic will be broadband and Director Hicks and whoever he may have with him.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for inviting us. My name is John Hicks, the State Budget Director, and we speak a little bit about the Broadband Deployment Fund. And let me first describe briefly, why I'm here sitting at the table with Sandy Williams, my longtime colleague here in state government. The governor had understood the gravity and the importance of these two projects, the wastewater and water and the broadband deployment. And the Infrastructure Authority is a pretty small state agency, maybe a dozen staff. So he wanted to draw on some of the other resources he has within his administration to basically help out the Infrastructure Authority. So So I have a really interesting and fun opportunity to involve myself in the Broadband Deployment Fund, working closely with the Infrastructure Authority. So, and we had a great opportunity, Secretary Gray and myself and others, to brief legislative leadership of both chambers, last month, which was give a little bit of an update on this in this committee, and later today at full A&R we'll be talking about the Broadband Deployment Fund as well. So let me go through the slides and look forward to your questions. So how much money do we have? Out of the $300 million was appropriated by the 2021 General Assembly session, and there's important caveats on that. But it's funded by the American Rescue Plan Act out of the Coronavirus State Fiscal Recovery Fund. There's also a Coronavirus Local Fiscal Recovery Fund that some of you all have referenced. This is the 2.183 billion, not used to saying that word, that the Kentucky's received, and we've already received 1/2 of that cash. That is they're going to do it in 50% pieces for most states, and we've already got it in the Treasury. So out of the $300 million appropriated, $250 million was appropriated for unserved and underserved broadband areas through House Bill 320. An important caveat: it limits awards of only $50 million of that $250 million before April 1 of 2022. Okay, so right now we're really looking at that $50 million. Another $50 million was appropriated in House Bill 382 to secure any economic development opportunities for commercial and industrial customers. And as of this date, none have yet arisen. We will work with the Economic Development Cabinet as those opportunities may arrive. So next slide. So what is the program? I'm glad Representative Pratt is here because you all had the foresight in the 2020 session to create the Broadband Deployment Fund by statute. And let me just add, been around government a long time, it was very well written piece of statute, very detailed. It guides this process clearly, and so we're not going to have to invent a whole lot of information in order to do this. But the fund by state statute is to assist governmental agencies and private sector entities to construct infrastructure for the deployment of broadband service to underserved and unserved areas of the Commonwealth. And it says to provide broadband service to residential, commercial, and industrial customers to secure a sound economy. Good, big picture public policy. Next slide. And so the statutes are guiding us as well as the federal interim final rule. And so in the statutes, which were slightly modified in the 21 session, it established the fund. It set definitions for what is unserved and underserved. And that is a speed test, a download speed of 25 megabytes per second or 3 megabytes upload is an underserved definition in Kentucky. For unserved, it's access to 10 megabytes download and 1 megabyte upload. And those are statutory definitions. The statute set out a grant application process with specific requirements, name, rank, and serial number of the applicant, all kinds of information required of them. And it requires at least a 50% match for these projects, different than what we just described on the water and wastewater in the statute. House Bill 382 modified the original legislation to permit other federal dollars to be used for an entity, an applicant, to match that 50%. The idea behind is the local fiscal recovery fund going out to counties and metro cities and non-entitlement units, most of our cities. They can use that money to assist in the project's financing. And so that was a very important change and one very relevant to the current period. Next slide. So the federal guidance that Representative Koenig had asked about, issued May 10. Again, they call it the interim final rule. They have a 60-day comment period on that. I will say this fund is being administered by the U.S. Department of Treasury. That is the same organization that administered the Coronavirus Relief Fund, which the Commonwealth received out of the CARES Act money. And in fact, one of the governor's awards has assisted us with this great technology in this room because of the need that you all had during the session and in the interim for mitigation efforts. And so I will say the U.S. Department of Treasury learned their lesson with the Coronavirus Relief Fund because they had guidance A, then guidance B, then guidance C, and while that was, confusing and difficult, I will say the flexibility improved with each increased guidance, so I won't complain too much about that. But I would suspect that we're not going to see a whole lot of change in the rule due to the comment period. That is, just like you all do when you view administrative regs, there's just a public comment period, and so they're going through their process. But I don't expect a whole lot to change. As Secretary Gray said, the guidance on drinking water and wastewater was very consistent with the programs the Kentucky Infrastructure Authority already implements. And in fact, if you read the rule, they describe why they wrote it, and they describe very consistently the things that have already been done with the wastewater revolving fund, the drinking water revolving loan funds. So anyway, we feel fairly confident that the guidance we receive now are not going to alter too much in these two areas, but that's just a prediction. So it focuses on unserved and underserved areas, just like our state statute does. It has the same definition for underserved, 25 meg download, 3 meg upload. Kentucky's unserved definition for unserved is lower, 10 megabytes downstream, 1 megabyte upstream. Now, we're getting clarification on the rule because the federal rule indicates that the 25 megabyte, 3 megabyte standard meets both their underserved and unserved areas. Okay, so we're going to seek clarification on that to make sure that's exactly what they mean. That a 25 meg, 3 meg is both unserved and underserved. Less than that, access to those services. So then the other thing they changed in the rule was the projects funded with this money must have a minimum speed of 100 meg download and upload. All right, that's fairly new, right? Their rationale is they've taken a look at all these measures of what a household, family of four who were doing school at home and work at home and how much they used. And it was significant in terms of the change from the prior year, how much more the power and speed they needed. So that was their rationale. And so our projects will have a requirement of at least a symmetrical 100 megabyte download and upload requirement, and hopefully more. And so there are some exceptions that we're going to be allowed to have due to excessive cost, geography, topology, but that project must still be, it leaves the 100 meg download in place. It allows the upload to be 20 or to 100 with scalability to 100. So anyway, I'm learning all these technical elements as I work through this process, but I wanted you all to understand because you're going to get questions. You're going to have people ask. Next slide. So our process sequence, we're still working on it. Unlike what Secretary Gray said and Sandy have helped administer, we do not have an existing process for broadband deployment grants, right? We've been doing water and wastewater for a long time. So we're starting from scratch. It's a greenfield, right? A number of states have moved in this direction. The federal government has moved in this direction. We're taking the lessons learned from those jurisdictions as we build our process. We have examined in detail at least a quarter of the states and what their process has been, from our neighbors in Tennessee and Ohio and Virginia to Minnesota and Michigan to Colorado. We have studied their processes, trying to learn what it is that we need to know as we build our process. And we've looked at the federal government's processes. So here is our framework as we currently sit today. And let me just state, we have decided that we're going to institute very soon a request for information, where we will give providers in governments, local governments, the opportunity to provide comments, suggestions, advice as we build our application process. So we're going to do that. We're going to do that in a very short order, but we thought it was necessary, to learn and be able to walk into an application development with the information that at least the providers would want to give us. Okay, so that's not on the slide, but I wanted to announce that for you all today. So we're looking at a two-stage RFP process, and RFP is required by our state law. We're going to ask for a notice of intent to apply, and we're going to put out an initial eligible unserved area map, right? And I say initial, that's the most important word in that sentence. Because as you all may have heard, the most common use of the map around the country is the Federal Communications Commission's, FCC's map, which is identified if a single location in a census block has sufficient speed that it's served. Well, your all statute foresaw that problem and said, even if that's the case, partial areas could still be allowed to be funded from the Broadband Deployment Fund. So, so parts of the county that are really not served, even though there's a part of a county or census block that is, still is going to be an eligible area to have a project application. So we're going to put out that notice of intent to apply to kind of get some of the key information of possible applicants, as well as put out the map, and basically have them come back to us and say that map is wrong, or that map needs this new information, or I can show you that this is a served area, or I can show you that it's an unserved area. And they can provide data, and the statute even allows for that. It's called a challenge process. But we're going to use it since Kentucky has never put out a map before for this purpose, right? So this is our first. Down the road, we're probably not going to do this two-stage process. But now we want to make sure, we want to make sure we have a good map, let's just say that, before people take the time and effort and resources to actually develop a project application. And so once we receive that notice of intent and the challenge process, we're going to look at the information, we're going to go back and forth, we'll make a determination on that. And then stage 2 is where we're going to put out, I'll say, the long application. The next slide. And that's really the project specifics, where, how much, down to addresses, right? We're going to require addresses that are going to be part of this project application, so that so that we're down to that granularity. Your intent in your law and the intent in the federal rule is to provide broadband services more than 100 megabytes to businesses and households. So the intention here is to light people up, right? Give them access where they do not now have access, or their access is too slow. And so we're going to, so it's easily to fit along those processes. So we're going to have an application process. We're going to review those. There's a challenge process to the application because the specificity of the geography will be known in an application, and another provider can say, no, I'm there already, or I'm going to be there by our statute in 12 months. And so we're going to have that process. Every state, even the federal government, has this kind of process. And so it's very different than like water and sewer, where you don't really have competing utilities in a geographical area typically. Here you do. You've got the marketplace. You also have municipalities who are involved in providing internet service. So we've got a different marketplace here, the public and the private, both being providers. And that's the case across the country. And so then there's going to be an evaluation of scoring and award offers and all of that. So this is a very technical area, issue, one that we want to be careful and deliberate about, but one at which, we're working very hard to get moving along. The Rfp process that we will release very soon is going to be step 1 for the world outside of us. Next slide, please. So how do you projects be selected? A question, well, the statute, and the modified statute gives us clear guidance about, first, we're not going to award funds where funds have already been awarded, or where they're currently designated or are, it should say adequate, not inadequate. We're going to, projects that reach the customers that are least economical to serve is in the new legislation. And that, we understand the policy implication of that, right? The marketplace does not go to the end of that county road because there are not enough residences for that business to make it, with those few customers. We understand that. But we're now seeing utility as a public good, internet service as a public good, and so we're putting federal and state money into that. Many other states are. So because of the $50 million limitation for the first year's award, we've chosen to go for the unserved as being the first step out of the box, rather than the underserved. All right. And so that's where we're going to be heading with our initial RFP. We may provide incentives for timely completion. We've had some discussion on that with water and sewer. And another element of the statute is to effectively provide service to the greatest number at lowest cost. I think, Chairman Blanton, you made that very relevant comment just a few minutes ago. And then other project attributes that are under consideration, right? We're going to be interested, why is the government involved here? One, it's to create access. But, you can have access without you can have the capacity without people adopting it, right? It's no good if people don't subscribe. And so we're going to be asking providers to talk about their adoption strategies. How are you going to get people to sign up? And so those kinds of things. That's just as important as having the wire there, having the fiber optic cable around. So we're working through those elements, and the RFI process will give us some more input into how to best evaluate those projects next. So timelines, not as concrete as the water and wastewater and drinking water. We're still under consideration. We're going to initiate the RFI process, but I expect the application to be out, I would say now, more in July time period. That also is consistent, hopefully, with any updates from the federal rule, because we'll have to abide by that no matter what we do and when we do it. So I think that what's to do, we do have some emergency regulations, but I want to speak to that, is the statute's written so well that there's not going to be a whole lot left to do through regulation. It'll be another way to communicate to the provider community, to local governments out there about the program, and we're going to do that. We'll repeat the statute in a number of cases. We'll comply with the federal guidance, because that is slightly different than the statute in a couple of ways I mentioned earlier. We're going to finalize that initial map, because it's got to go out with the initial notice of intent to apply, and then we're completing the application development, as I've spoken to in several instances. Next, anything left there? I think that's it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Director Hicks. Couple quick questions before I get to the other members. First of all, will there be a separate portal for application for the broadband over the water and sewage?
Yes.
And that's not yet available as far as what that domain's going to be. Is that
That's
correct?
correct.
Okay. The second question is, will the broadband go through the ad districts like the water and sewer projects, in getting the decisions made out to the local utilities or local governments?
No.
That will come directly from KIA?
No, it'll be the applications.
Okay.
It'll be the eligible entities who may apply, which is public sector and private sector.
Okay. All right. Very good. First up is Representative
Mr. Chair, I have a couple of questions I'd like to ask at some point.
Yes, sir. I'll put you on the list, Senator, and we'll get to you.
Thank you.
Representative Meredith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Hicks, just a real brief question. Obviously, we talked about the cost escalations with the water and sewer projects in the previous presentation. I think we're seeing that here too, most likely. But the question that I have is a little more directed towards the 100 meg up, 100 meg down designation. That will create a significant cost escalation as well, I would think. Or was that going to be the standard before this new designation happened anyway?
Well, the 100 meg, is I'll just say this, quoting the FCC, the Treasury's final rule, 100 meg and above is the most common speed of those people in the United States who have access. So it is not an unusual speed there. In fact, I know, at my house, I've got much more than 100 meg. So that was the rationale they put in there. Not only the need for it, but the fact that it's there in so many places already.
I guess my concern was I just don't want to see us pricing ourselves out of being able to do things for people that have very little to nothing right now to get them to what we experience in the metropolitan areas, maybe, is my concern there. When you have nothing and you're trying to get there in a lot of places, it's a little concerning. Obviously, it would be great to be able to provide the same service that you have in the major metropolitan areas, but it's better to have a good bit of something than all of everything that you don't get anything.
Yeah, I understand. But that's the federal standard that we will abide by. And I think behind that is equity, right? That may be an issue in rural Kentucky, but we need rural Kentucky to have high speed as well.
Representative Koenig.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Hicks, it's my understanding that there are some regs being worked on already for this. Is that correct?
Yes.
And in those regs, it indicates shall we say, focus on rural areas. True. Not so true?
Not so true, because we've got, one, we've got to follow the federal rules on that. But second, we're focusing on unserved, as the first 50 million. So that has a heavy map relationship to rural Kentucky, in Kentucky. So most of the geographic areas that are unserved are rural in Kentucky.
Okay, and I guess I just want to make sure. I mean, obviously, I come from a suburban area that is generally considered to be urban, but there are places in southern Boone, Kenton, and Campbell that are just as rural as others, and I want to make sure that they're not left out because of the county they're in, rather than the reality of their ability to be served.
Understood. And in fact, the unit of analysis in the statute is census block. But we clearly have within the statute the ability to parse that census block into an unserved, underserved area, because they're going to give us, addresses, right? And so if you're in an urban county, that you're an unserved portion of that unserved portion is just as eligible, for these funds as an unserved area in another part of the state.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Wheatley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Director Hicks, for being here and explaining this. And I think these questions are pretty simple and straightforward. So in the evaluation of the allocation of the funds, you talked about public versus private. Is there any particular weight, or is there more weight given to one or the other if a project comes in as public, which might do more for the public good and is free or available through the public entity? Is that going to be more weighted than a private project?
Well, I think our mission is primarily to get access to high-speed internet to those who don't have it. And I think we're going to not going to inject ourselves, let me just say, into the marketplace about who provides it. Now, there could be a competition in a single area. That's legitimate, and so some of these other variables that we're going to look at, adoption strategies, we're going to ask about pricing, we're going to ask about information on the experience of providing internet service. We're going to ask some of these basic things, that may come down to splitting a hair, between a competitive application in the same area. But I don't think we're going to give different weight to who the provider is.
Okay, thank you. And just another brief question. Representative Koenig alluded to there being urban areas, suburban areas, and there being needs in some areas. And some of these areas already have public provider, public broadband available to them, but they may not meet that 100 Mbps threshold. So projects that could become from public to private. Is there any issue with that? Is that I'm thinking of, for instance, in my district, there are areas that the city provides free broadband, but it may not reach 100 speed in some of the areas. So to boost that to that area, can the city put in for a private or a public project, or can it be competed against related to a private provider coming in and wanting to boost it to that?
The answer is yes. As long as the existing area does not have the unserved then it's eligible. It meets the unserved test after our clarification from the U.S. Treasury on their definition of unserved. The underserved is already 25 meg. So that's what makes you eligible, is if you do not have access to internet service at that speed now, and therefore that area can be accessible. Now, there's a challenge process. So just because you're only at 25 doesn't mean you're mandated to go to 100. Okay? If another provider is, I'm providing service there, then, and it's legitimate, then you can't come in and take away that service, even if that service would lift it to 100. You understand what I'm saying? So if it's already there at 25, it's not an eligible area.
And that was, you're getting to the question. So if a public provider provides it above 25, less than 100, but there are already private providers who provide much greater speeds than that. Would that public provider not be eligible at that point?
Correct.
Okay. Thanks.
Representative Pratt.
Thank you for your kind words earlier, Mr. Hicks. You touched on mapping, and I guess my comment and a question, because I understood there were federal money and state money for the mapping coming down, and even in Scott County, they recently went ahead and hired a private firm to do the mapping, and found out that 36% of the providers wasn't even providing 25 up and 3 down, vice versa anyway. So with that, who's going to do the mapping? How are we going to determine those maps are correct? So who's going to do the mapping?
Well, we're starting, and in the data we're using right now is the FCC's data, that down to the census block, with that speed rating. Yep. We've got recently the FCC last fall had an auction, the Rural Development Opportunity Fund, and so in areas in which those funds were awarded, they become ineligible. So we take them off even if they're not yet up. And then the funds that from the CARES Act that we put into we call it crowdsourcing, the internet-based speed test, that individuals across Kentucky, we're using that data to help us illuminate, kind of with a granularity, the speeds or lack thereof in certain areas of the state. So we're going to start with that collection of data, using geographic mapping data. Sandy Williams' staff, we've got a very, very good mapper in her staff that is pulling this together, and we're going to use that as the initial map. Then we expect the input from potential providers and potential applicants to refine that map. They got to show proof that they can meet the information, and then we'll change the map. So with that information, then we'll have a final map for purposes of the RFP. So we're taking what's already publicly available, mostly from the federal government, a little bit from our own, and then we're going to take from providers and other applicants the information that they can show that is legitimate, that's got proof behind it, and use that to help finalize the map.
Thanks, sir.
Okay, now remotely, Senator Thomas.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Loud and clear.
Yes, I have a two-part question for Mr. Hicks, if that's acceptable to you.
Please proceed.
All right, thank you. Mr. Hicks, you didn't talk about an end date, an objective, and I think we have to have that because we've been talking about this as far back as the Kentucky Wired Network. When do we want to see this project completed? When do we want to provide access to all Kentuckians? Do we have a timeline in mind? That's my first question to you.
Yeah, thank you, Senator Thomas. The first question is the federal funds for which we're financing these projects have to be obligated by the end of calendar year 2024. They can be finally expended by the end of calendar year 2026. So just to get to the what must we do with these federal dollars, that is the requirement. From your larger public policy question, the sooner we can get people connected up, the better. But as a public policy, the Commonwealth, we haven't yet set a date by which we want everybody connected. Some states have attempted to say those things. No one has yet achieved it, but it's surely a good goal to shoot for.
Okay, and then the second half of my question really goes to, I like your concept of getting down to the addresses, but it seems to me that access is only one half of getting to success. You've got to get to utility as well. I mean, having access to people and them not using it really defeats the purpose. And I know I'm going to please my colleague, Senator Gibbons, when I say this, but are we considering some sort of like computer education, computer training, so that people who are not familiar with the internet, who don't have computers, we can get them trained and utilizing this? Maybe partner with the schools, maybe partner with healthcare industries, so that these people can use computers for education, for healthcare, I'm not too worried about commerce because they will understand how to use the internet. But what are we thinking about access at all? Because we've got to. It doesn't do any good to. Utility. It doesn't do any good to have it there if they're not using it.
Yeah, thank you, Senator Thomas. I would agree. One of the things that we will be asking for in this application is an applicant's adoption strategy. What are the means by which they're going to pursue getting people to access the services? And as it relates to other kinds of training and requirements, our library system, in Kentucky has done a wonderful job over the years of providing services to individuals on how to use the internet. Community action agencies have also done that, particularly in areas where low subscription rates are already there, and so those kind of things. So we're really seeking that out from the applicant to do that. As to a larger effort, the federal government, as a part of the American Rescue Plan Act, is putting $7 billion into what is called E-rate, and that is the federal program that subsidizes schools and libraries to get access to high-speed internet. And both of those areas, because I'm familiar with what we do in our public schools, we have a really robust method of assuring, and teaching, access to our school children. And boy, they've been practicing a lot in the last year, on that. And so those are kind of things but the wraparound services, as you might think of there, are not things that can be financed through this program and particularly this program, because it is to only construct the infrastructure.
That concludes my questions, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator Thomas. Next will be Senator West, and then we'll have one more person after that, and we got to wrap things up. We got to save time for the commissioner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Director Hicks, for the presentation. You answered most of my question with Senator Thomas's answer as far as funds being expended by 2026. And my question kind of dovetails with what Senator McDaniel was getting at earlier. Our real problem really is probably going to be material costs, not only finding good contractors, but finding a contractor to do this work. Does that 2026 deadline, is it the same deadline in the wastewater program?
Yeah, that's the federal deadline for the expenditure of the state fiscal recovery funds.
Is that January of 2026, or is it December
31, 2026.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Last person, Representative Tate.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So my question actually applies to both of these projects, the water and the wastewater, as well as the broadband. We've got that 2026 deadline in our minds now. So with this project you talked about, you really don't have your project plan formed yet. So what are your plans for both of these projects to come back to this body, or to report to this body like on a monthly basis, or a periodic basis, what the status is from the application process as well as the completion of those applications?
Well, thank you for the question, Representative Tate. I know the governor has committed to frequent reporting on these projects, not only for transparency purposes, but just for information, to keep you all aware of the status of projects. So while we haven't put together a specific plan, our intention is to have frequent reporting. Once we get into the project by project, I expect a reporting that has a status on each of the projects that have been awarded. We'll keep it internally at least monthly. I think there's some final things to be decided on how frequently you all would like that information, but that's our plan.
Thank you very much, because in one of my counties, I know I have 136 miles of unserved water, and so I really want to make sure that my allocation gets used and used appropriately. So thank you. Thank you.
Director Hicks, we thank you for your presentation on broadband. As a matter of fact, on both of these items of water and broadband, periodically have you all come in just to keep us informed, because our constituents ask us questions, and also it's a good way for the public to tune in and try to stay informed. And so I think everybody's excited about all this going on. They want as much information, and we want to provide them that information. So thank you all for being here today with us.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Next up, we'll have the Commissioner of Department of Local Governments, Dennis King. And Commissioner, welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's good to be home.
It's good to have you here, sir.
You never leave these memories out of your mind, not for 1 minute. We'll try to make this as painless as possible. Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, the members of the committee. It is a pleasure to be here with you today. I'm Dennis Keene, the Department of Local Government, and more importantly, in regard to the American Recovery Plan Act recently passed by Congress. As you are aware, the Department for Local Government has been tasked over the past 15 months with distributing COVID-19 funding to cities and counties, along with all of its duties, which include the funding and approval of projects in many of your legislative districts. In the 92nd District, Chairman Blanton, we have funded water projects in Knott, McGoffin, and Pike counties. In 89th District, Representative Goforth, we have funded water projects, recovery centers, and playgrounds. In the 57th District of Representative Graham, we have funded Dolly Graham Park, which I frequent. In the 78th District and Senate District 27, we assisted in the funding of a splash pad in Cynthiana, along with a water line replacement project in Flemingsburg, aerospace program in Moorhead State, as well as recovery center, all in Senate 27. These are all projects that fall under the preview of DLG. Today, we are here to discuss our newest assignment, which is the distribution of American Recovery Plan funds as recently passed by Congress. To help fill you in on where we are in the time I have brought with me, Billy Johnson, he's our Director of State and Funding and Federal Funding, and also we have Matt Stevens here to answer your legal questions. Billy, do you want to explain the fund?
Sure. Good morning. As Director Hicks said a few minutes ago, the money that we will be allocating actually just hit the bank account on Friday of last week. So what are we going to be doing as an agency?
Ms. Johnson, excuse me, could you turn your mic on?
Oh, I thought it was on. Oh, it is now?
All right.
I'm sorry.
Thank you.
Okay. We'll try it again. So our funds have entered into the state account as of Friday of last week, and it's only the half of the funding that we are only going to be doing to the non-entitlement units of government within the cities. So the county governments are going to be applying to the U.S. Treasury for their own funding, along with the entitlement units of government across the state, which is 9 of those. So the total amount that we have is right at about $162 million. On May the 13th, we reached out to all of our cities across the state via email. We have also, in the last few weeks, involved the Kentucky League of Cities, along with the area development districts across the state, to help push these cities to get in the proper documentation that we have to have. Unlike our CRF funds, this process is going to be a little bit more, I think, easier for our cities to get the information to us. We do have to have a certified budget number from the mayor's assigned form that will then let us know, okay, they are wanting their allocation, because we do have some cities that have already reached out that said that they will not be receiving the allocations that they are designated. I don't understand that, but okay. So if you want to reach out to some of your cities to help us as well, the deadline for that budget certification form was actually set for today. And in conclusion of that, the other part of that is we are now working on our non-entitlement terms and conditions forms that they will also have to sign. We are signing them a state ID number that will be on that form. Those forms will be going out also a Title VI assurance form that they have to have, because they will be reporting directly to the federal government, and I think the cities are to report probably sometime in August, and then I think it will proceed in October, if I'm correct on what I've read on that. The eligible activities for this money is the support of public health expenditures by funding COVID-19 mitigation efforts, so medical expenses, behavioral health care, certain public health and safety staff. This will also address the economic impacts caused by the public health emergency, including economic harms to workers, households, small businesses, impacted industries, and the public sector. In the past, they've been able to do the first responder salary payrolls. That is, again, another aspect of this guidance. I think it has been updated a little bit on how they perceive what you're dedicated to on your time for mitigating COVID. And I think that actually it's on the self-discretion on how the cities do at this time. Let me back up and say that we are working on getting the allocated amounts. The federal government already sit down a ballpark figure, but with the budget certification form coming in, we have to make sure that they have to follow the 75% threshold, which is mentioned in the legislation, and we have to make sure that that fund is correct. So whatever they've been allocated, they cannot receive over more than 75% of their budget, and that date that was written in the wording was as of January 27th of 2020, which is pre-pandemic. So, of course, they'll be able to invest in water, sewer, and broadband, what all you've been hearing about today, making the necessary investments to improve access to the clean drinking water, the wastewater and stormwater infrastructure, and to expand access to broadband internet. The premium pay for essential workers, there is some language in there that is becoming a very big interest to some of our mayors we've been in discussions with on the premium pay. I think it's a $13 extension, not to exceed a $25,000 a year, and it's not a full-time, but it is an incentive, a bonus, I guess you can say. Also, too, the replacement of lost revenue in the public sector is also going to be something that a lot of the mayors have expressed interest in. Also, as Director Hicks mentioned a while ago, there is a 60-day comment period that we are still waiting on, and as we talk to our mayors one-on-one, and when they ask for our guidance, we're going to offer up as much guidance as they want. But like I said, it is their self-discretion on what they use their funding for. We have recommended that they might want to wait probably till about the end of July to see what this new, after they do get the comment sections in, to see what the final rule will read. So in a nutshell, that's where we are right now, because there's still a whole lot going on our part of it, and hopefully we will have the money back out the door by the end of June to the cities.
And this is just cities?
Yes, only cities.
Only cities, not the counties.
Non-entitlement cities.
Okay, so I've got a quick question before we move to members. Ms. Johnson, you mentioned earlier that some of them they said they didn't need all their allocation. So that's going to leave some monies in the pot. Are those monies able to be distributed to other cities in need, or does that stay there? How does that work? If they don't take some monies, what happens to that money?
According to the webinar that I listened to on Friday, the cities cannot transfer their funds, unlike the way it was written in the CRF. We are still waiting on how to determine how long a city does not want their allocation. We've only received contact verbally in writing by 2 cities out of a 400 plus. So it's still a little bit early for us to say what that money will. My presumption on that is it would go back to Treasury.
Thank you. We have a question from Representative Goforth.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So have the cities been notified what their allocations are already?
Not on the pinpointed dollar. Now, okay. KLC had sent out some preliminary numbers, and we have to wait to get everybody's budget form in before we make sure we do a 75% formula check on that. I don't foresee the numbers deviating a whole lot from what they already think that they possibly could be getting. But the federal guidance also put out a percentage based on population on what they could be getting as well.
So this isn't an application process. They're
No.
getting these funds regardless unless they contact you and tell you, I don't want them.
Well, we have to have a budget certification.
Well, a budget
form.
certification
Yes,
form.
correct.
But as long as you have the budget certification form, the cities are going to get the funds that has been deemed allocated
Yes.
to them regardless unless they say, we don't want them.
Correct.
Okay, all right. Thank you. Thank you.
Once it goes in your general fund, it's hard to track.
That's what I thought, but I was just clarifying.
Yeah.
So, good for them. Good for them. So, Mr. Commissioner, it's always good to see you. We miss having you up here, but we're glad you're where you are. You're always a delight to work with. We hope to see you back soon. Ms. Johnson, thank you for being here. No other members have any questions. I will remind everybody that our next meeting will be on July the 7th at 9 o'clock here in this same room. And with nothing further, we will stand adjourned. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman.